Apologies for being late, devotees. Jai Radha Madhava Indra Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Indra Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Givaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Givaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Welcome everybody to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Sorry to be late. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 15. Hopefully today's text is text number 7. So, Dehena Dehino Rajam Dehateho Vijayate Birjat Eva Yata Bijam Dehi Artha Iva Sasvatam Dehina Dehino Rajan Dehat Deho Vijayate Bijat eva yata bijam dehi artha iva sasvataham dehino rajan dehat deho bijayate bijat eva yata bijam dehi artha iva sasvataham. Okay, anybody would like to recite?
I would like to recite. Dehena dehino rajan deha deho vijayate bijat eva yata bijam deharta eva shashvataha.
Dehena dehino rajan deha deho bijayate bijad eva yata bijam deharta eva shashvata.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Dehina, by the body. Sorry, Dehena, by the body. Dehina, of the father possessing a material body. Rajan, O king. Dehat, from the body of the mother. Deha, another body. Abhijayate, takes birth. Bijat, from one seed. Eva, indeed. Yata, just as. Bijam, another seed. Dehi, a person who has accepted a material body. Artaha, the material elements. Eva, like. Sasvata, eternal. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. As from one seed, another seed is generated, O king, so from one body, the body of the father, through another body, the body of the mother, a third body is generated, the body of the son. As the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity who appears through these material elements are also eternal. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. From the Bhagavad Gita, we understand that there are two energies, namely the superior energy and inferior energy. Inferior energy consists of the 5 gross and 3 subtle material elements. Living entity who represents the superior energy appears in different types of bodies through these elements by the manipulation or supervision of the material energy. Actually, both the material and spiritual energies, matter and spirit, exist eternally as potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The potent entity is the Supreme Person, since the spiritual energy, the living being, who is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, desires to enjoy this material world. The Lord gives him a chance to accept different types of material bodies and enjoy or suffer in different material conditions. Factually, the spiritual energy, the living entity, who desires to enjoy material things, is manipulated by the Supreme Lord. The so-called father and mother have nothing to do with the living entity. As a result of his own choice and karma, the living being takes different bodies through the agency of so-called fathers and mothers. Om Jnana Timrandasya Jananjana Shalakai Chakshurumitam Yana Tasmai Shri Gurube Namah. Panchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Cha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhakta. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, as one seed, as from one seed, another seed is generated, O king. So, from one body, the body of the father, through another body, the body of the mother, a third body is generated, the body of the son. As the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity who appears through these material elements is also eternal. So, of course, we are learning a little bit about Chitraketu's dilemma and his bewilderment. And of course, in this particular chapter, just quickly go there. We see that these two great sages, Angira Rishi and Narad, are giving advice that is very, very essential to King Chitraketu. He is bewildered that he has lost his son and heir to the kingdom. And of course, in these verses, we are learning about, now in this particular verse, we're learning about the inferior energy and the superior energy of the Lord. Prabhupada mentions in the purport the 5 gross elements and the 3 subtle elements. And so, of course, the 5 gross elements he's mentioning is the earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And the 3 elements, the material elements that he's talking about, is the none other than the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So I was remembering a few things in relation to this. Of course, we spoke about previously that even when Arjuna's son Abhimanyu was killed on the battlefield, of course, when Arjuna got back to base and was wondering why Abhimanyu was not there, of course he learned about Abhimanyu's death. But at some point in the journey, it seems like there's different narrations given about it, but it seems like at different places speak differently about the same Mahabharat battle. But it seems like at some point Arjuna did take Abhimanyu's wife and Arjuna to go and see Abhimanyu. And then there's a whole pastime, of how Abhimanyu had actually taken birth, and he was only allowed 14 years in the material world, and he had to return. And of course, Abhimanyu was not interested in returning. So in a similar way, we also learned that Narad Muni had brought back to life Chitraketu's son. And of course, his son could not recognize his father. He was saying, this is my son, this is my son. But of course, Chitraketu's son is explaining that, I've had so many mothers and so many fathers. Who are you? And so in this way, he also could see that, this idea of so-called mother and father that, we get attached to in this material world is not a factual existence. Although in the material world, it seems like it is factual. So in this particular verse, of course, the material energy, the living entity is described as spiritual only because of the fact that, we have the Paramatma in the heart, or the super soul, the soul is present. And of course, we're all parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So as eternal fragmental parts and parcels, we are also spiritual by nature. So of course, we understand qualitatively, we are the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but quantitatively, we are different. So the size of the spirit soul is given, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. What's the size? 1/10,000, the tip of your hair. So, it's very clear that, you're very, very small and minuscule in comparison to even, just material elements, 1/10,000, what to speak of the spiritual energy. So the material energy is called Maya, and it's of course one of the very multi-energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so I just wanted to read this, it's a purport that Prabhupada had given. And he, of course, narrates this purport also, and once you hear it, you'll recognize it immediately. So Prabhupada says here, the material energy called Maya is also one of the multi-energies of the Lord, and we, the living entities, are the marginal energy of the Lord. The living entities are described as superior to material energy. When the marginal energy is in contact with the inferior, material energy, an incompatible situation arises. But when the marginal energy is in contact with the superior energy, Hara, it is established in its happy, normal condition. These three words, namely Hara, Krishna, and Rama, are the transcendental seeds of the Maha Mantra. The chanting is a spiritual call for the Lord and his energy to give protection to the conditioned soul. This chanting is exactly like the genuine cry of a child for its mother. Mother Hara helps the devotee achieve the Supreme Father's grace, and the Lord reveals himself to the devotee who chants this mantra sincerely. No other means of spiritual realization is as effective in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy as the chanting of the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, many of us can recognize, Prabhupada reciting this particular purport here. And we can understand that this is the recommended process in this age of chanting this Maha Mantra. So, of course, he's giving, a little more information that the living entity is marginal energy. And of course, when it comes into contact with the inferior energy, then, it remains bound up in the material world. And of course, if we come into contact with this Maha Mantra, which is transcendental, then, we come into contact with the superior energy of the Lord. And then in this case, we are in our natural position in contact with the spiritual energy of the Lord. So then, of course, one can ask, what happens when one dies? What is death? Death means separation of the two energies, separation of the material energy and the spiritual energy. So we can understand when death occurs, that the soul leaves the body. And so what's left behind is actually the body, which is material. And the soul, which is spiritual, departs. So the living entities in Bhagavad Gita 15:7, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So this is our challenge, that being in the material world, we have to figure out, everybody is trying to figure out how to be happy. But we can understand from, even just these few sentences here, that the living entity, because it is superior by nature, it's never going to be happy in the material world. So, how does one go about becoming happy in the material world? And we learn from, previous classes, previous verses, that instead of trying to satisfy our own senses, if we can satisfy the senses of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then in this way, we can become happy. But just trying to satisfy our own senses, we become more and more entangled in the material world, more and more frustrated. So Prabhupada likes to use, of course, many, many analogies. And of course, we can also relate to analogies better than sometimes the technical aspects given to us in the scripture. And so one analogy Prabhupada was using in his purports is that the inferior energy has no power unless a superior energy is involved. And he gives the example of the sea, the ocean. It is very, very quiet and calm, just if it's water only. But when a superior force, air, pushes it, high waves are created. The sea has no power without the superior force. And so if we try to, analyze where is air coming from, and, how air is created, of course, we understand that there are demigods in charge of the different aspects of the material universes. But if we continue, trying to analyze where does air come from, and like that, higher and higher and higher, we find that air is ultimately coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So another analogy Prabhupada uses is that suppose a railroad train is just starting to move. So how is the actual coaches moving? So we find that there is an engine that pushes or pulls one car. And then the first car pulls the second car, and the second car pulls the third car, and so on. The entire train is moving. But of course, we want to ask the question, so, how is this whole arrangement happening? And if we trace it right to the beginning, we find that it originates at an engineer, that he designed the railroad car, the engine, the entire series of cars was designed by the engine. So, and of course, where does the living entity come from? So we can analyze, and we understand that ultimately we are coming from Krishna. So in this way, we see that, within the material world, everything originates from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so some references, if we don't believe these things, we have to take from the Shastra. Otherwise, if we don't take, advice from the scriptures, then, we find that the scientists, who are classic examples, they are continuously speculating, how does life come from, or how does everything come from? They're constantly speculating. So in Bhagavad Gita 14:4, Krishna is saying, all species of life are made possible by birth in material nature, and I am the seed-giving father. So this analogy of seed is there again in this particular verse that we're reading about seed-giving father. And the classic example, of course, is a banyan tree, a huge tree, which will grow and eventually produce millions and millions of more seeds. So in a similar way, Krishna is the original seed-giving father of all items within the material universe. So the other classic example that everybody is familiar with is that just like sparks of a fire, fall to the ground, and, they remain as fire, even though they're just sparks. So in a similar way, the living entity is a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But as parts and parcels of Krishna, we are also similar to these sparks of fire. So we have the choice, we have free will, and because of this free will, we have chosen to fall down into the material energy. But we can also make a choice to remain in the spiritual energy of the Lord as we like. We can either keep ourselves in Krishna consciousness, or we can become further and further entangled in the material world and get more and more bound up. So, we have this choice as living entities, remain in the material world lifetime after lifetime. We've already been through so many millions and billions of lifetimes, and we can choose Krishna consciousness. So, of course, we understand that as part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are spiritual by nature. We have that spark, but, we understand being in this material world for so many lifetimes, that spark, sometimes we say, is almost extinguished. So, we have no recollection, no remembrance of Krishna. And so by the mercy of a devotee, we come into contact with Krishna consciousness, and, this spark suddenly starts becoming illuminated again. So think about the analogy that, a fire, there is a fire, then a spark falls down on dry grass, and of course the potential is there of that grass catching on fire again. So, it's entirely up to us whether we choose the material or spiritual energy. Then, of course, we spoke about the scientists, and of course we see that in a similar way to the scientists, continue speculating, we find that the Mayavadi philosophers, they also understand some aspects of Brahman, to the point where they realize, Aham Brahmasmi. And at that point, they think they are liberated. But actually, that liberation is theoretical liberation. If you are not situated in devotional service, one has to come to the point of devotional service, engaging in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then you can, that is considered practical liberation. Otherwise, just thinking that I am Narayan, I have become Narayan, again, is just speculation. If it is not backed up by practical devotional service. And so we understand that the living entity, the yogi can, arrive or achieve at the Brahma Jyoti, but because we're all, individual souls, parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there's no activity. And so gradually, the living entity will again fall down back into the material pool. So in this analogy of, again, the living entity and its connection to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prabhupada uses another analogy in one of the purports. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. So this, of course, is not true. The rice is not the cause of the scorpion being born. So actually, some mother scorpion had laid the eggs before, and it just sits there until it's ready to hatch. So similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. Although, according to limited understanding and no knowledge of the Shastra, we might think that the the material energy is the cause of our birth in the material world. And so we all understand from Bhagavad Gita this process by which, the living entity is born in the womb of the mother. And I wanted to quickly just read that so I don't mix it up. So we understand this process of rains coming from the higher planetary system, rains and grains. And let me just quickly read that analogy. So from the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, third chapter, Arjuna, is very bewildered about, whether he should fight the battle or not. And Krishna gradually takes him, along this yoga ladder and, explains to him how one has to perform sacrifices. And by the process of sacrifice, one can gradually make spiritual advancement. And then as part of the process of sacrifice, he urges him to do his duty. And if one does his duty without attachment, then in this way, one is situated in a better position if one is not attached to the fruitive results. So in one purport, Prabhupada is explaining, in the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain a specific heavenly planet and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman. And thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice and so repeat the same cycle of birth and death. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to the process of Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return back to Godhead. So this is the process, the cycle of birth and death that the living entity continuously follows. And of course, by taking to devotional service, Krishna consciousness, we can, avoid this painful situation within the material world, where, we are constantly searching for happiness, trying to please our senses with no end in sight. And, our parents have done it, our grandparents have done it, great-grandparents, and we can continue the line and see how this cycle of birth and death has just been perpetual. It seems like with no end in sight. But actually, there is an end in sight. We have all been very fortunate to come into contact with devotees, and thereby we have left off, from some previous life where we were practicing Krishna consciousness and have an opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead in this very lifetime. So we should take full advantage. We see in these verses here, I heard one devotee was giving class and he was saying that we see, two great sages are preaching to Chitraketu here. Sometimes we see Sankirtan devotees go out and preach, on the streets. And sometimes two powerful Sankirtan devotees will team up and, make a powerful team to go and convince living entities that they are struggling very hard in this material world. And they should wake up, Jeev Jago, and take up spiritual life. So in this way, we see two great powerful sages have teamed up to convince Chitraketu, gradually how this process works. And, this is not his real son. He's, of course, such a powerful king. And, somehow he has become bewildered and attached to the son of his. So in his bewilderment, of course, King Chitraketu, misunderstood, the blessing and curse that was given or boon to him. So, of course, we are reading these nice verses and here trying to understand what is the spiritual, what is the material. And of course, we understand the living entity is marginal, can be spiritual, can, just continue being bound up in this material world. And so in a similar way, in our day-to-day lives, we should be very mindful of, attracting both good karma and bad karma. So I used that example before that we should consider 3 different bank accounts we have. We have a good bank account, a bad bank account, and we have a spiritual bank account. So every activity that we do, we should be careful which deposits are we making. Are we making deposits into our good bank account? So if we do, good activities, proper activities, then we can make deposits into the good bank account. And if we, of course, are deviant and make rascal decisions, then we start making deposits into the bad bank account. But of course, we understand that we neither want to make deposits into the good or bad bank account, because that means another birth. If we, of course, incur bad karma, we'll have to come back and suffer the effects of, whatever we have done. Or if we also do good, become a good philanthropist in the world, just do lots of good activities, then we accumulate all this good karma. And unfortunately, we'll have to take birth again to get the benefit of all our good karma. But we as devotees understand we want to act on the transcendental platform and neither get good nor bad karma. So that was one analogy I wanted to share. Then there was one more, which I need to quickly find here. Okay, maybe I'll find it later. So that's what I have to share about inferior energy, superior energy, and marginal energy. Okay, yeah, maybe one more quick thought on this. Prabhupada, of course, uses this analogy a lot about how the ocean and the seashore. So he uses that to describe this superior energy and inferior energy, and then the living entity. So the living entity as marginal energy is like the seashore, where sometimes the high tide is in, and part of the seashore is covered in water, and other times when there's low tide, then the seashore is uncovered, and you can see the sand on the seashore. So in a similar way, the living entity sometimes is covered and sometimes is uncovered, and so sometimes it's in contact with the superior energy, sometimes it's in contact with the inferior energy of the Lord. So that analogy is there. Okay, I'll stop there. Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions? No technical questions. Yes, please try.
Somewhat technical.
Okay, let's try.
So you're talking about how you're quoting about the path that the living entity takes into the body, from the rains, from the heavenly planets, the rains, and then the grains, and then all these things.
How it becomes semen and impregnation
but,
takes place, yes.
The population, especially if their parents didn't follow
Kalpodan samskara,
aren't coming from the heavenly planets. They're either ghosts, or, as Prabhupada said, a bunch of big demons, which is why we have such bad weather. So how does that fit with the idea that we coming through the rains and all of these things?
Okay, you can give the answer also.
I don't know.
Okay, Kalaswarup Prabhu has a technical question that this idea that Prabhupada was giving in this purport I was reading about how rains and grains, eventually become semen and, impregnate the mother, and, the living entity is born. So he's bringing up the point that, the pious, so-called living entities take birth in this manner. So what about, the other impious Vana Sankara living entities? How do they take birth? So anybody has any thoughts of how the other living entities take birth? Looking for more scholars out there. Okay, any more comments and questions? We'll take a rain check on that. We'll do some research and try to understand exactly how the other living entities take birth.
What was the question? I couldn't understand.
So the question is, I read this one purport where Prabhupada is explaining, in the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain different heavenly planets. So of course, the heavenly planets, there's also demons living there. So,
They're subterranean.
Subterranean, okay.
Subterranean.
And consequently, the living entity reaches these planets. So this is the purport I read, right? When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity, that took himself to the heavenly planets because he had a desire to go there, and he performed the necessary sacrifices. So then at that point, the living entity descends again back to earth in the form of rain. Then it takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifices, and so repeat the same cycle of birth and death. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids these sacrifices. So yeah, there's this category of living entities who, manage to get to the higher planetary systems or the heavenly planetary systems, this is how they fall down. So Kalaswarup is asking, what about all the other rascal living entities that didn't make it to the higher planetary systems? How do they take birth? And I don't have a shastric answer for him.
Well, they take birth in a variety of ways, but they don't go through the process of elevation to the heavenly planets and then descending in the rain, and from the rain to grains and into the semen of a human body, and then the spirit soul is just transferred from one body to another without going through that process.
To his karma and
yeah. According to to one's actions, living entity is entitled to a particular situation in material life. If we're talking about human beings who have not elevated themselves to the heavenly planets, then they undergo judgment in the court of Yamaraj. They may undergo some period of hellish torment, and then according to their karma, they get a particular type of body. In Kali Yuga, most often they are denied another material body. They become ghosts in Kali Yuga for a very, very long time, after which they get various types of animal bodies. And that also for a long period of time before eventually, after a very long time, they may get an opportunity for a human birth, which is very rare. But animals undergo a process of transmigration that is like a highway. There are two directions of travel. And this is the great danger for those in the human form of life, that you may descend into the animal species. So it means that from the human species, you take animal birth, and then you descend gradually, lifetime after lifetime, you descend through all of the 8 million animal species to the lowest position, and then gradually you rise up again, gradually elevating to higher and higher varieties of species before you get an opportunity for human birth again in one of the 400,000 human species. So it's extremely rare, but the Krishna describes the descent into the animal species as the most dangerous type of fear, for several reasons. Because it is a terribly hellish condition in which you are always threatened with predation, because one living entity is food for another. So very fearful condition, but also it means that you have to go through the entire cycle. You descend to the bottom, you become some microbe, and then gradually you ascend again. It happens under the influence of nature, that there is a progression both downward and upward, gradual evolution of consciousness, which takes a very, very long time.
Right.
But the transmigration of the soul is just from the heart of one body into the womb of another body, where the sperm and ovum have combined the time of conception. Actually, the living entity is placed into the semen, and the spermatozoa is actually a living entity. Human sperm is a human being, and out of countless hundreds of millions of such sperm cells, one may get an opportunity to actually fertilize an egg and develop a full human body. The whole process is very, very time consuming, and the opportunity for human birth is extremely rare. The example Prabhupada has given sometimes is that it is like there is a piece of wood, a board floating in the vast Pacific Ocean, and it has a knothole in it. And somewhere in the ocean, there is a turtle swimming, and at some point he comes to the surface for air, and his head just happens to poke up through the knothole in that one piece of wood floating somewhere on the vast ocean. So that the chances are extremely, extremely slim, very, very rare. So the example is given like that human birth is extremely rare. And so Srila Prabhupada's point is that we should take it very seriously. Such a rare opportunity. Only in human life do we have the opportunity to progress in spiritual life. It's a crossroads, very special opportunity, and to fail to take advantage of that is an immense loss. Anyway, I'm rambling. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, some illumination is there. So then, of course, we're always meditating. This age of Kali Yuga, we shouldn't take for granted, only because it's a very simple process of remembering Krishna. And, we always hear Prabhupada saying 24 hours a day, we should be engaged in chanting Hare Krishna. And so how practically to do that? And so then I stumbled on Bhagavad Gita 7:8. And in 7:8, I was very surprised to read it again. I had forgotten it. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, I am the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. I am the sound of ether and ability in man. And so, of course, many of us remember this verse, but then what we should do is we should read the purport, and Prabhupada simplifies it to the nuts and bolts of that very seemingly elevated verse. What does it really mean? And so I'll just read it quickly. Hopefully it'll leave an impression in my mind that I won't forget it again. In this verse, Sri Krishna is describing how we can become fully Krishna conscious in all stages of life. All living entities must drink water. So Krishna is saying, I am the taste of water. The taste of water is so nice that when we are thirsty, nothing but water seems to satisfy us. No manufacturer can create the pure taste of water. I mean, many people are trying, but of course, the pure taste of water is there. We can thus remember Krishna or God when we drink water. No one can avoid drinking water every day of his life. So God consciousness is there. How can we forget? Similarly, so then, I am the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon. So here Prabhupada is explaining the other analogy. Similarly, when there is some illumination, that is also Krishna. The original effulgence in the spiritual sky, the Brahma Jyoti, emanates from the body of Krishna. This material sky is covered. The very nature of the material universe is darkness, which we experience as night. It is being artificially illuminated by the sun, by the reflected light of the moon, and by electricity. When where is the illumination coming from? The sun is being, where is the illumination coming from? The sun is being illumined by the Brahma Jyoti, or the bright effulgence of the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, there is no need for sun, moon, or electricity, because there everything is illuminated by the Brahma Jyoti. On this earth, however, we can remember Krishna whenever we see some illumination of the sun. Then he's going to the third analogy. When we chant the Vedic mantras, which begins with Om, we can also remember Krishna. Om, like Hare Krishna, is also an address to God, and Om is also Krishna. Shabda means sound, and whenever we hear by any sound, we should know that it is a vibration of the original sound, the pure sound, Om, or Hare Krishna. Whatever sound we hear in the material world is but a reflection of the original spiritual sound, Om. In this way, when we hear sound, when we drink water, when we see some illumination, we can remember God. If we can do this, then when will we not remember God? This is the process of Krishna consciousness. In this way, we can remember Krishna 24 hours a day. And in this way, Krishna is always with us. Of course, Krishna is always with us. But as soon as we remember this, his presence is factual and is felt. And so then Prabhupada goes to describe, the 9 processes of devotional service, starting with Shravanam, Kirtanam, and so forth. And so, it seems like a very simple process. When you're drinking water, remember Krishna. When you see light, remember Krishna. So in this way, of course, we're also trying to train ourselves that there is Krishna in the heart of every living entity. And so in this way, we should just keep looking for opportunities to remember Krishna. And when we remember Krishna, like Prabhupada is saying here, he is factually present before us. When we chant the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, then Krishna is right there with us. Any more last comments and questions? We got 1 more minute.
A bunch of hands up in the chat there.
Oh, okay, sorry. Please, anybody go. James, nice to hear your voice.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. I don't think my question will last the 1 minute, but maybe someone can text me or something. It was regarding the transmigration of the soul. So I've heard the point that Taraka Prabhu brought about how you would have to go through. I believe that he said the animal species go through them from the lowest again all the way through. In Bhagavad Gita, there was the picture literations. I was kind of confused about, like, there's pictures of like a man, he's like ferociously eating meat, and then it shows a picture of a tiger. And there's like a woman, she's like modeling, and then it shows a picture of a tree. So is that just like a illustration showing these behaviors of what can happen, or is it just that's where it confuses me, the illustrations, and then this notion that I've heard many times about going all the way through the species again. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So, okay, we'll engage in some discussion about exactly how that process and transmigration works. I wanted to quickly maybe get 1 more question. Jana, and then Nagari, maybe your questions.
You had mentioned in this wonderful class that we can choose whether we are in the material or spiritual energies. But there's these forces of the material modes acting upon us, and it seems like with Maya's effect on us, how much can we really choose? Can you talk about that?
How much can we
choose?
How much we can choose. So, of course, as living entities, we have a choice, and you can either choose material or choose spiritual. And so the idea is choosing material, makes us further bound up in the material world. And so why do we want to just, continuously choose material things? It just keeps us, bound in this material world, keeps us in illusion. So we want to be choose spiritual, so that benefits us, benefits the soul gets happy. And in this way, there's a chance, we have a greater chance of getting out of this material realm and going back home, back to Godhead. I'm not sure exactly what you were requesting from the question. Nagari Krishna Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for that very illuminating class. So my question relates to that very nice, succinct explanation you gave of death, that death is simply a separation of the spirit soul from matter. So in your personal practice and cultivation of giving one life for Krishna, this particular life, how has out-of-body experiences nourished your practice?
Out-of-body experiences? Hare Krishna. So the way I see life, of course, I try to make it very simple. And I think it's no secret, everybody has this experience that, when we're engaged in devotional service, we get some glimpses of the spiritual energy of the Lord by glimpses of happiness. And, it becomes clear that when you're working, 14, 15 hours a day, how can you be happy? So there has to be another energy involved. It can't just be complete material energy. Otherwise, you'd just be so exhausted that you just pass out. And of course, sometimes that does happen. But the idea is that, we get these glimpses of happiness and spiritual happiness, and it might just be sparks, it's not continuous, it's still the association of devotees is very, very important in executing devotional service. And, we help each other, on this journey of practicing devotional service. And so in this way, we can gradually navigate, life in the material world. There's a higher purpose that we are following the order of our spiritual master, and trying to choose, like Jana was asking, trying to choose the spiritual instead of just the material. So I think the recommendation is choose the spiritual energy as we execute our devotional service. And in this way, we can gradually make advancement and go back home, back to Godhead. We should discuss more. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Shri Radha Damodar ki jai. Rantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.